demo. I will start off where we left off. I've just added a couple system modules here. I did a very simple time settings one just to capture the item timeline item and the actual period as a Boolean. So right now I'm considering that we start forecasting from July onwards, being the current period. And so we have 6 months of actuals up to from January to June. And I also did a lookups module just to pick up the current period. If we had versions, that might be in a version module, but I'm just keeping it simple here. We're going to start off by creating a new calculation module here. We can add the other line items as we go. So for now, I'm just going to start off with this one and bring the count dimension here. Just going to pivot this around this way. So this will be our calculation module, and I'll get to this in a second. I also want to create a properties module for my waterfall. So it's still going to be dimensioned by count and by time, same as my waterfall one. The reason why I'm doing this separately is, of course, here I wouldn't have to because it's just the same dimensionality of my waterfall calculation module. But usually you would have other dimensions that apply here. It could be sales channel, it could be a customer, it could be product, it could be several things. So you would want to keep your properties module separately because you save a little bit of space here, as these settings would be the same for any product or any customer or any other item of the dimensions that may apply to your calculation. So this way you're a bit more efficient with the size of the model. The line items we're going to need in this properties module. So we want the actuals and the switchover diagonal to be a Boolean. And these will determine a lot of how the calculation will work. We want the item month dimensioned here as the time period itself. And we want the count item to be dimensioned as the list count. And this will be just a number. Okay, so the first line item we're going to start off with is the month, because this will determine a lot of how the other ones will work. So how do we bring in the month into this one? So in this pivoted view that we're talking about now, we're talking about the months as being the cohorts. And we want to bring the month in a diagonal view upwards. So we're going to say January plus 0 figures come in here, January plus 1 figures come in there, January plus 2 figures come in here. So it's a bit of a different perspective than the first example. So in order to bring in the months, I would need to bring in the month item as a diagonal line as well. So we would say July 22 plus 0 is here. July 22 is the first month of June cohort. July 22 plus 2 month is the May cohort. So May would be in its plus 2 during July. So that's what we want to bring in here, sort of diagonal lines upwards. How we do that is, again, with an offset. Now, I have an extra trick here. On my lookups module, I created a line item. It has no dimensions and it's formatted as a month, and I just call it no month. And the intent of this line item is just to remain empty because I want something for my offset to fall back on. So how we're going to bring in the month item into this diagonal line, we're going to offset. What we want to pick up is the month item. So I'm just going to refer back to my time settings here. And I want to offset it by my count. So that's in my property of the count list as a code. And this is where I'm going to trick Anaplan into picking up a blank line in case it doesn't know what to pick up. So I just want these to be blank. Yeah, so this basically pops in every relevant month into this line. So the ones that are empty means that they're falling out of the time scale. Right now, I just have a year 22 as a time scale. So if I had 23, this would be then January 23. as I don't have it in my timescale, I'm just keeping it empty. And that's why I'm referring back to this empty line item here, just so that the offset has nothing to pick up and leave these blank lines here. So once we have this one, we can actually populate the actual Boolean. So in this one, we can just refer back to our time settings Boolean of what the actual periods are. But instead of picking up natural month from the dimension, we're going to look up the month based on what we populated here in the diagonal lines. So now we create a section of our table that determines what the actuals are. So here we have up to count 5 of the January cohort already being actuals. So count 5 will be then July 22 or June 22, which is our last month of actuals. And so everything after July 22 wouldn't be considered as actuals. We can also determine the switchover diagonal here quite easily. That might be useful for some reports. So we just want to do if the month is equal to the current period from my lookups module, and now we have just that switchover diagonal. So this would be the last actual data for each of the cohorts that already exist. So in this count item, I want to just populate the count for whenever my actuals already exist. So I'm just going to say if actuals, then item of my count list, which is here, else blank. So we have the count populated here for the actuals already. And the last one, I just want to bring a 1 in case this is not blank. So I'm just going to say if is not blank, count item, then 1, else 0. Okay, so it just brings in the 1 for the months where we need it. So our settings are all set up, and now we can actually start with the calculation. The first step, we created the line item for actuals already. So ideally, you would bring in the actuals from a data cube. So however you want to set that up with your users, or depending on the data source that you have, somehow you would need to populate the actuals here. For the purpose of this example, I'm just going to populate it with some dummy data manually. So once you have this data in, you can actually use this historical data to determine what has been the retention rate for the past few cohorts. So what I'm going to do is then create another line item that brings in the actual retention rate. This will then be a percentage. You can also bring in some DCA so that these fields get hidden for the forecast, as they're not really relevant for the forecast. So I could just change my access driver to look at my actuals line item from the properties module. And now I wouldn't be able to write on the forecast months here, because this is an actuals line item, of course. If this is a formula, then you can just set the read access drive for the actuals line item as well. So to calculate the actual retention, what I'm going to do is just pick up my actuals and divide by the actuals of the count 0. I'm just going to use a select here, as this list count shouldn't really change dynamically, or it shouldn't be a production list at all. I'm just using the select here for simplification process as well. But here you will see how the retention curve is looking for these older cohorts. And what we can do is we can use this data to refine what we expect to have as a retention rate, instead of relying on a manual input from the business, for example. Now I'm going to create a new module to calculate the average of the attrition curves. So this module will be dimensioned then by count, and I'm just going to make a line item for the attrition percentage. And so we want to bring in the waterfall calculation data from here, and just pick up the average of every available cohort here in our historicals. So what I want to do is then pick up the actuals retention And what we want to do is select time all periods, because then we pick up the sum of all available data here. And I want to divide this by the count of how many months are of available data. And that's why we created Waterfall properties, count month of actuals. So we want to pick up this one as well and select periods. So this is taking the count 0 of 100%, which is always the case, as we always have 100% new clients on count 0. But the 83 then is now being calculated as the average of count 1 for the 5 available cohorts. So this, you can see the average here being 83% as well. So all is it doing, it's taking the sum of these 5 guys and dividing by the sum of the count month, which is here, which is also the number 5. I've just removed the DCA so that we can see the sum. And it's important that the summary method here is indeed the sum, so that we can pick up the 413% divided by the count of 5, which brings us to the 83% attrition rate. In this example, we have an average attrition rate up to count 5. And then we wouldn't have any historical data available for months +0 to +11. So you may want to choose to override it if you're lacking historical data. So I just added a quick override here, and I put in some figures for the months where we don't have historical data yet. So now we have the 12 months of attrition rate, and we can bring it back to forecast into our waterfall calculation. So now we're going to need a couple new line items here as well for our forecast. So I'm going to break it down, and first I'm going to bring in the forecast of the count 0, and afterwards I'm going to create the final forecast. So I'm breaking it down into 2 steps of calculation. First, I'm going to bring in the forecast of the month 0, which is basically your new client acquisition plan, however you choose to forecast. I'm just going to use the same module we had for the first demo, where we had some inputs of new clients. So this is in this module right here, and we just have how many new clients we expect. Now for this demo, I'm going to put in some new clients as of July. So what will my formula be here? First of all, I would say if it's actuals, I want to pick up my actuals, right? So my Boolean that determines which combinations are actuals is right here in my properties module. So if it's actuals, then pick up my line item where the actual data is. Else, then first thing I'm going to do is check if in the property of the count list, I'm going to check if the item of the count list is the item +0. Yeah, so in that case, I want to pick up my new clients. Else, I will just want a 0 for this step of calculation. So now we see we have the diagonal line for the actual data that already exists. And for any forecasted month, so from July onwards, I just have the +0 figures coming in here from their client acquisition targets. Now, all we need to do is take these new cohorts and apply the attrition rate all the way throughout the year. We also want to apply the acquisition rate on the top cohorts as well, so that we can populate the remaining months for each of the cohorts as well. So now what we're going to do is we're going to repeat the first step, the first part of this formula, to say if it's actuals, then actuals. Now, what I want to do, if it's forecast, I want to pick up first the forecast +0, and I want to select my count 0 again. And I want to multiply this by my new attrition curve. And there we go. So now we have our forecast coming in for all the remaining data points that were still 0. We have the older cohorts being forecasted with the retention rates up to the end of the year. And we have all the new cohorts as well with their expectation. Now, these will be in the future years, probably as we get towards this side of the grid. But you get the picture, and you would actually be able to sum this back into a forecasting model by summing based on the waterfall properties month item. So then picking up these diagonal data points will give you the December number of active clients. So that being this diagonal line right here.